What's up guys, welcome to my Retribution Paladin tips and tricks for the heroic Nighthold in Legion patch 7.2, and in this video I'm going to be going over things that I try to do and think about to try to increase my DPS and pull out what I can on each boss individually. Now if you're looking for just a general guide to Ret Paladin, I do have a video linked in the description below, so check that out if you like. Now I'll be going over things like talents and just what I'm thinking about, and you are able to follow along with what spells I've cast with the icon on the left hand side of the screen right above the chat box, which will show you what I have just cast. So at the start I will pre-pot, and typically I'll use Old War, just get some damage on the boss, but if you want to do some extra damage on the adds, you can do that by using Prolonged Power instead. Now you'll notice we're not doing the cheese strat. If you are, of course, you're just going to be doing full AoE from the start, but if you're not, make sure you're just using Templar's Verdict at the beginning until the adds come out. Now, of course, you're not going to parse very well or pull huge, amazing numbers unless you do the 2 strat, so don't worry too much about that if you're not doing that. So, basically just doing the single target rotation here. Building up Holy Power, spending it, all that good stuff. Now, I can wait for Wake of Ashes if I wanted to for adds, but I wanted to get some damage in on the boss, plus I wanted to keep it lined up or use the last bit of Crusade with it, so I got the maximum amount of damage from it. Now, as soon as the adds come out, I start using Divine Storm and just hitting as many as I can with the Judgment Golden trait, the new one that we've gotten recently. You don't have to apply Judgment to anything but the boss, really, as long as they're close enough to get spread. But if you do, just make sure you do judge at least the big adds before you start blowing them up with AoE. Now, anytime you can line up Wake of Ashes with the adds is really, really good. Of course, because it does scale very well with AoE. So do try to do that if you can, although you can also just try to keep it lined up with your Crusade, but if you're using something like Convergence, then you might not want to waste your time with that because you might not line up anyway. Now speaking of trinkets, Convergence in general, and as well as this boss of course, is only going to be better than other things if you get an extra cast of Crusade out, at least one extra cast through the course of the fight. Otherwise you might as well use something that just boosts your damage during Crusade instead, or just a really nice stat stick or something like that. Also, if your raid has a tendency to die a lot for some reason, you can also consider things like Memento might be pretty good if you have a high level one of those. But in general, you know, use something that does line up well with Crusader, just something that's really good for Ret Paladins in general. Now again, if you're doing the cheese strat, AoE trinkets are kind of really big, really strong to use, like the trinket off of this guy, the Claw of the Crystalline Skorpyron, will be really good for that constant AoE cleave. Now other than that, of course, make sure you're using your Divine Steed to get behind a rock for Shockwave if you need to. And as far as your second pot goes, you can either line it up with like Bloodlust Heroism, Exoskeleton Vulnerability, things like that. Kind of whatever fits best, or even your second Crusade if nothing really lines up. You can also just use like a Prolonged Power if you want to focus on adds and just doing lots of like AoE damage to kind of maximize your numbers as your second pot. And if you want to focus solely on the boss, which would be a pretty rare case, but if you do, then you could use an Old War as your second pot, but most likely you'll be using Prolonged Power since there is a lot of AoE going on. Now, of course, be aware of anyone pulling extra adds. That is an opportunity to do some more Divine Storms. Dodge your Focus Blast, of course, all that stuff. Make sure you are staying close enough to the adds to be getting your Divine Hammer damage into them, as well as Divine Storm. Now, of course, Divine Storm with your third golden trait should be flying 20 yards in front of you, making it a lot easier, but, you know, Divine Hammer damage is also very important, so do make sure you're close enough to the adds to hit those when possible. If you're using something like Eye of Command as a trinket, just know that you can stay on the boss if your tanks are pulling them close enough. Of course, you can stay on the boss to keep that buff up 100% of the time and just have maximum crits all the time. But if they do separate for some reason, or they're doing something funky, you know, don't be afraid to switch targets. So, pretty simple fight there. Switching between single target and AoE when you need to. So as far as Chronomatic is concerned, we are going to be using Divine Hammer most of the time. It's really close to good, onto better on single target anyway, and there are adds, so you can kind of take advantage of it. So we'll go ahead and start, pre-pot with Old War of course, do our opener, pop all our cooldowns, and generally you'll be using Bloodlust or Heroism at the start along with that. So again, as far as trinkets are concerned, if you can squeeze out an extra Crusade with Convergence of Fates, then it's really, really good. And if you can't, then use something that boost your damage during Crusade, like Horn of Valor, Faulty Countermeasure, stuff like that. So basically just pure single target dummy, just dodge stuff of course as things are flying out. And do make sure that you start cleaving once the ad comes out. So go ahead and start hitting this ad, start Divine Storming, cleaving it, especially when the 4 come out, but even with the 2 you definitely want to be doing that. Now one thing I kind of messed up on here is I should be kind of in the ads with Divine Hammer, and here I go ahead and move, dodge the balls of course, but you do want to make sure your Divine Hammer is getting maximum value on those ads as much as possible. After that, we just go and hit the boss, and it's back to single target dummy phase. Now, you do want to use your Shield of Vengeance if possible, make it blow up, it's just extra damage, plus it can help you survive, and you want to use that at some point, probably during this power overwhelming, when most skills at this point will be sitting here and just killing him instead of doing extra stuff or doing the other phases. In other phases, just the same story though, do mechanics, hit the boss, single target until the ad comes out, and then AoE it down with Divine Storm. So once you get into higher levels of power overwhelming, you might be able to cause your Shield of Vengeance to break, and that would be a good time. If not, you could use it during, say, the blue balls flying out from the center, or some of the orange balls that he shoots out, and just stand in them on purpose with Shield of Vengeance to have it blow up for you. It's a pretty simple fight. Just kind of max your single target DPS, and follow the rotation, and pick what trinkets are best. Again, people dying, Memento can always be decent, and then if Convergence gives you an extra Crusade, then it's really worth taking, and if it doesn't, then you'll have to use something else like Faulty Countermeasure, Eye of Command, things like that just boost your DPS overall. Now, on Trilliax, you can use, or you can justify using Blade of Wrath sometimes, as well as Cavalier if you need to move out a lot to grab cakes or do bombs and stuff, but we'll get into the talents in a little bit here. So at the start of the fight, of course, pop your cooldowns, go really hard, because normally you'll Bloodlust and do as much damage as possible here. Now between Divine Hammer and Blade of Wrath, if you have to go out and do mechanics a lot, or just have significant downtime, then Divine Hammer is probably going to be a bit better, because Blade of Wrath does suffer if you can't have full uptime on the boss. You're not getting as many auto attacks, means you don't get as many refreshes on your Blade of Wrath, meaning that you're not gaining that much from the talent. So if you're out a lot, or you're just not confident in taking advantage of every Blade of Wrath reset, then go ahead and use Divine Hammer, and you won't do badly, and it might actually do better for you. Now, Cavalier and Divine Intervention, if you're always going out for cakes, then Cavalier can be really nice, because it allows you to use it to both go out and grab stuff, like jump on scrubbers, grab cakes, as well as get into the middle for Annihilation in case you have a cake, or you're bind it to someone, like with the Arcane Bonds or whatever they're called. And so it can be really, really useful to have extra charges of your movement speed. Now, once you go into the middle, of course, dodge the beam. Try to stay on the back end of him if possible, not in the beam, of course, and be prepared if he swaps. But just try not to get parried by him as he turns around and sometimes faces you. In addition, you can use Shield of Vengeance at any point that you feel scared to save yourself. Or you can try to forcibly use it on cooldown and pop it by taking a bunch of damage, like standing in these purple puddles, grabbing a cake and stepping in the puddle, stuff like that, just to make it blow up and do that extra damage if you're confident that you don't need it to survive. Other than that, you're basically staying on the boss and just doing as much damage as possible. Make sure you're using your pre-pot at the start of the fight, Old War, and second pot, Old War as well, with Crusade. This is a pure single target fight. Damage to scrubbers is completely irrelevant, so make sure you are not wasting your time padding on them with like Divine Storm. You're not helping anything, and if you're looking for parses, that damage is excluded anyway, excuse me. So make sure you're just doing pure single target. If you're jumping on scrubbers or grabbing a cake and doing that, then make sure you do pop a cooldown if you need to. It won't kill you right away. It does like 1 million or so damage, but if you're low, it can get you into a very, very dangerous spot, if not kill you outright at that low health. Now, as far as trinkets go, it's a single target fight, as I mentioned, so make sure you use things that are really good for single target. We're thinking Eye of Command here, Faulty Countermeasure, Convergence, again, if you can squeeze out another Crusade from using that versus what you would normally get, then it can be really good, and if not, then definitely one of the other good single target trinkets. Memento could be good if people die to the beam a lot, So if you know there are people notorious in your raid team for dying to the beam, it could be really good, and you might even take advantage of people dying a lot with your crusade timing. Especially if you know you can't squeeze another one in, you could wait for a little bit and wait till someone tends to die, like on the beam phase, let them die and grab that retribution buff, and then pop crusade and take advantage of that. And then at this point, again, it's just target dummy. You're just killing the boss, doing your maximum single target DPS that you can, while making sure you don't stand in too much bad stuff. Now for Spellblade, you're going to want your Divine Hammer for sure, and possibly Cavalier, kind of up to you, but I like Divine Intervention in general when I can get away with it. So start pre-pot Old War because it's single target, pop your cooldowns, go ham, and generally you'll be Bloodlust or Heroism during the start of the fight, but that kind of is up to your raid group. Now, it's pure single target, so make sure you're using Templar's Verdict at the beginning. There's nothing else to hit, and just do all that you can. Now, in terms of trinkets here, Convergence of Fate can be nice if, again, it squeezes in an extra Crusade, or even if it makes the Crusades line up with ad phases a lot better so you can get the maximum cleave out of it. Other than that, good AoE trinkets are really strong, or things that line up well with Crusade, like Horn of Valor, stuff like that. Maybe Eye of Command, if you can stay on the boss and cleave off of her. Now, during Frost phase with Mark of Frost, you shouldn't be dealing with it too much because you are melee. But if you want to be a little bastard like myself, you can kind of position yourself to be as far away as possible without being in front of the boss, away from where Mark of Frost is breaking, to kind of reduce the chance that you might get it, especially if you have a lot of melee and not so many ranged and healers. Of course, if you're assigned to handle them anyway, don't do this or you probably get in trouble. But you see Detonate is down now, so ads are coming up, and as soon as they come up, go ahead and start shooting your Divine Storm over there. Start cleaving away, and make sure you're kind of in the middle of the ads. And this should be tanked on the boss, so it should be pretty close. Now, normally I switch to the big one because he takes more damage when he gets big. But, again, I'm a bit of a DPS like whore, so I stay on the boss because I have Eye of Command and I kind of wanted to keep that buff up. But in general, you should switch off. Now, if you need to, you can use your Divine Steed to stay in the circle and not get frozen. But also angle your Divine Storms toward anyone who is frozen, as well as making sure you hit all of the ads. Now, you can use Shield of Vengeance at any point to do extra damage. Either like a fire line, as you see happening now, you could like send in that on purpose to deal that extra damage. Or you can use it during like the Frost phase when the ads are getting big and swollen and freezing things, and just take some damage there and break it. I would recommend having it up for Arcane phase though, and I'll mention why when we get there. But here, we're at single target on the boss, so it's pretty simple. Just target dummy right now. Now, as soon as the ads spawn, you want to start hitting them, and you want to probably be using Divine Storm so you can hit as many as possible, because you can hit a lot of the ads with Divine Storm as it does shoot forward quite a bit. That means you want to be angling yourself in such a way that you hit as many ads as possible without missing potential ones or like focusing on the ones that you need to. Now, of course, use your Rebuke to interrupt, and you can also use Hammer of Justice and possibly Blinding Light as well to kind of help stop some of the casts, as you do want to make sure you are not letting them get off. Also, try not to stand in between ads and get pulsed on by both of their like AoE pulses, because that does do quite a bit of damage, and you want to avoid that if possible. So once they're dead, you're back on the boss, doing as much damage as you can. At this point, this particular guild runs very far with the boss, so it's a good time for Divine Steed. We also got a Stampeding Roar, which is pretty cool. And I noticed, okay, I think I'm going to be able to get my Crusade up in time with the Arcane ads, which is really cool. So I'll prepare for that, and I want to save Shield of Vengeance here, because we move very slowly when she detonates these ads, or these orbs, and we want to have a defensive up for that necessarily. So if possible, try to save your Shield of Vengeance. I don't think I necessarily did in this one, but I also have Divine Intervention and Divine Shield if necessary, to make sure that I don't die to these explosions. Now, once they're done exploding and you're alive, I went ahead and pop Crusade to get some stacks up. If you have it early, that's great. Prolonged Power a second pot if it's during an Arcane phase out. If it's just single target, then pop Old War. And just cleave as much as possible. You should try to keep Divine Hammer in the middle of these. I was probably misplaying it a little bit, but just making sure my Divine Storm was hitting everything. But Divine Hammer does a lot as well, so make sure you try to take advantage of that if possible. Now, the reason I popped Crusade a little bit early on Aluriel and not waiting for the ads is because I wanted to build up several stacks of it before the ads came out to maximize the AoE I was doing to those ads. So it's just a little bit of eking out a bit more DPS that way because I knew the ads would die pretty quickly. Now again, if the ads are exploding like instantly, you might not want to wait for the ads to use Crusade, or again, you could do what I did and try to use it a bit early and just build up some stacks before you get to the ads. That's pretty much it. It's rinse and repeat for the rest of the fight, so kind of apply the same concepts if you have to go through multiple phases of Frost, Fire, and Arcane. Now for Tichondrius, you definitely want Divine Hammer. You can definitely argue for Cavalier, especially if you're not tanking the ads on the boss. Now in this case we're messing around, so we did end up cheesing the boss. But if you're not, Cavalier can help you stay on top of the ads and kind of cleave them down as much as possible. So at the start, of course, pop your cooldowns, pre-pot. If you want to focus on helping the ads, you could Prolonged, or you can Old War if you just want to focus on boss damage at the start, and just do as much damage as possible. So Templar's Verdict, your single target, pretty simple here. Now, we ended up moving the boss eventually, as I was telling them if we're going to cheese it, we should. And once the ads come out, make sure you're Divine Storming, hitting them as much as possible, cleaving them. And if you have to chase them, like in a normal fight where you have the boss separate from the ads, then Cavalier becomes very valuable so that you can do that all the time. Keep going back and forth from boss to ads without losing too much uptime. Now in this case, they are being tanked on top of the boss, so just cleave a lot, lots of Divine Storm going on. And of course, you can delay Wake of Ashes a little bit, just to make sure that you hit the ads with it rather than missing it and just hitting the boss, which is a lot less DPS. Now, if you're confident that you can survive, you could stay on the boss if you're not able to hide it behind a pillar like this, if it's right on top of him. But make sure you pop something, like Shield of Vengeance. Hopefully not Divine Shield, that'd be kind of a big cooldown to use on that, but, you know, you can kind of work with what you have. And then just make sure you're handling the Carrion Plague like you're supposed to, trying to infect the whole raid just for the sake of your DPS, unless they don't mind that, so kind of up to you there, and up to your raid team. So it's pretty simple, you just do as much damage as possible. If they ask you to break, make sure you do go and help break those brands of Argus. And then just lots of cleaving. Now, I could technically try to maximize my Divine Hammer uptime on the ads by moving in closer, although I'd be facing the boss at that point, so kind of a tough call there. Now, you probably don't want to use your Crusade, and I wouldn't really recommend Convergence of Fates for this reason, although I did have it, because you want to use it the next time it comes up, the next time you have the Bat Phase buff, so you're not going to be using it at this point. So definitely save that if you can for once you come out of this next phase. So we go into the night phase, and just do as much damage as you can. So Divine Storm all the way, you're really, really good at this. Your Divine Hammer, Divine Storm does so much damage. Try to get Judgment on stuff, especially as there are more ads, because it will spread with your new golden trait. But if you can't, no big deal. Just try to do as much AoE as possible, kill as many bats, help people get their stacks, their buffs, so that you can do really, really well as a raid. So Divine Storm, definitely the most important one in here, other than, or Divine Hammer, to be used to make sure you're cleaving a lot, and then Divine Storm. Then you come out, and there should be a Bloodlust typically, and you should pop your cooldowns and pots. And I probably recommend popping Prolonged Power, because the ads do come out pretty quickly in this phase, versus the first phase, where they take a little bit longer. So you can get more AoE damage. Now, definitely make sure you're killing the ads, especially the new ones that come out, because they are quite important to kill. And if you get to phase 3, a third, or phase 1 rather, which we didn't in this particular video, then make sure, of course, you do go back and kill those ads as well. Your AoE is really, really strong, so take advantage of it. Lots of Divine Storms when you can, Wake of Ashes on multiple targets if you can, and other than that, you're just kind of hitting as much as possible and using mobility to get back and forth between the ads and the boss if they are separated like they are typically. Of course, you can use Shield of Vengeance to help do DPS, or you can use it generally for Echoes of the Void to stay on the boss a little bit longer, and also to make it explode and deal a little bit of extra damage to him, as I tried to do here. I realized it's not quite enough damage. I went out late, so you could use like a purple cloud or something and make it blow up that way, or Brands of Argus when they come out. So that's pretty much it with Tichondrius. If you do get that new ad at the third phase 1, then make sure you're inside of the ring or completely outside of it. It only hits in like this weird area around him, so you can be immune from it and be on the ad at the same time. Just kind of be aware of your positioning. That's pretty much the name of the game on Tichondrius. Lots of AoE. Take advantage of the cleave that your raid allows you to, and the fight allows you to, and if you're confident that you don't need bubble your Divine Intervention to automatically proc, then Cavalier is really, really strong here to allow you to move from one part of the room to the other. Now for Krosus, it's a pretty simple, straightforward fight, mostly single target. You can definitely use Cavalier if you need to soak pitches, but I'm going to generally recommend Divine Hammer, and the reason is you don't have full uptime on him. You have to run away for the bridge break. You potentially have to go get pitches when he throws those out. So Blade of Wrath may lose a lot of value on this particular fight because of all the downtime that you have. So at the start, most groups will Bloodlust, Parabolism, and so you pop your cooldowns, do as much damage as possible. And as far as this fight goes, it's pretty easy to have your Shield of Vengeance break, so if you want to use that as a DPS increase, definitely do take advantage. Use it like on Slam here, it will line up with every other Slam, like the first Slam on each bridge break. And if that's not enough, you could Send in Beam. So I'm being a baddie here, I'm like, I want this to blow up, so I Send in Beam, and have the rest of it explode. And then you're just doing pure single target at this point. Now if there are ads clumped up, you can go and help those out if they're not too far. With Divine Hammer and Divine Storm, you can actually do quite a bit of damage on it. So in this case, I'm being kind of naughty. I'm like, I'll just, our group's generally pretty good at handling the ads, so I'll go ahead and just stay on the boss. But again, don't get wiped for it, so make sure you are handling that when you need to. Now, you do want to make sure you don't die. So again, if you find that you're getting pretty low for some reason, make sure you do save your Shield of Vengeance for those moments to survive. But again, take advantage of it when you can, offensively, if you know you don't need it defensively. So lots of stuff hurts on this fight. Orb, Slam, beams that you shouldn't get hit by, but you can use Shield of Vengeance on any one of these that you like. You can Divine Steed away, of course, if you need to for the bridge break, but as you see there, you don't have to. Now, as far as trinkets go, of course, if you could squeeze out another Crusade, Convergence is really nice. Other than that, just good single target talent, or single target trinkets, rather, if you can't squeeze another Crusade out with your Convergence of Fates. Things, again, like Eye of Command, Fall to Countermeasure, stuff like that, really, really strong on single target. And in general, you won't be hitting the ads too often, and here you see I use Shield of Vengeance again, because I know it'll blow up or get hit by Slam. But you can go and AoE the ads if they are close by, and again, using Cavalier with Divine Steed and having 2 charges of it is really, really good for grabbing Burning Pitch in a hurry. But other than that, Krosus is basically a giant target dummy for you, so do as much single target DPS as you can. And again, if you happen to know people die a lot, like people are being really naughty on beams and stuff, and they always get hit by it, then you can take advantage of that with Retribution. Now in that case, got low for some reason. I forgot I didn't have Divine Intervention, so I didn't pop Bubble. But, same kind of idea. It doesn't really affect your rotation. Just keep going and doing as much DPS as possible. That's another thing too, of course, if you know you're going to get low and though you might die, make sure you pop a cooler, and especially if you don't have Divine Intervention, you've chosen Cavalier instead of being a potato like me and just sitting there and taking it. Now, I do try to stay at the front of the bridge on every bridge break so I can get back to the boss as soon as possible. So make sure you do try to do that if possible. Don't walk into the water, of course, because that would be embarrassing and bad. But just to keep high uptime on him as much as possible. Dodge beams, of course. And just do the few mechanics that there are and pew pew to your heart's content. Here's another Slam, so I go ahead and use Shield of Vengeance. And then just try to finish him up here before he throws this orb and before he does more of his stuff. Now, for High Botanist, you're going to want Divine Hammer for Heroic because it does turn into a very big AoE fight in the last half of his health bar. So definitely do use that. And if you have to go chase ads a lot, I suppose you could use Cavalier, but generally I'd be using Divine Intervention just as a general safeguard. So at the start, you're going full out single target, so pre-pot with Old War, of course. And then later we'll be using Prolonged Power as your second part. So dodge all the mechanics you can. If you again want to take advantage of Shield of Vengeance, you can probably use a Solar Collapse like that one and just pop your Shield of Vengeance, step into it, let it hit you once. But otherwise save it because there's a lot of AoE damage on this fight and you might find yourself in a bit of a sticky situation from time to time. Now for this fight, trinket wise, it's really good to be using any sort of AoE trinket. Claw of the Crystalline Scorpion is really good. Eye of Command if you can stay on the boss the whole time, as far as your main target. And as you saw briefly there, if the ads come by melee, I do recommend you definitely try to Divine Storm them at least. And of course if you're assigned to go chase them down, make sure you go chase them down. Put on your Judgment and go ahead and Divine Storm them, because at 2 targets it's still worth doing. Now, in my particular case, we're supposed to have the ranged bring the ads to the melee, so I don't really go out and chase them too often now. When they get close enough, I'll consider Divine Storming them as they get in range. Now when the boss transitions to 2 bosses, so phase 2, then make sure you start switching from your Templar's Verdict into Divine Storm, so right about here, and make sure you're hitting both of them with both Divine Storm and Divine Hammer as much as possible. Now that relies a lot on your tanks and where they tend to put the bosses, if they go the same direction, if like Controlled Chaos hits in the melee, stuff like that. But for the balls, definitely just again more Divine Storm, it helps cleave it down. And if you're assigned to go chase the balls, then go ahead and chase them down to kill the ones that you're supposed to, but most groups will have the melee stay and just do the first ball. As far as using Crusade, I'm using Convergence because it does tend to give me decent results. Again, if you get an extra Crusade, that's great, and if not, don't use it. But definitely make sure you have make sure you get a Crusade used in phase 3, which happens at about 50%, because that's when you're going to be doing the most damage to the bosses possible. Especially if you can line it up with Heroism or Bloodlust, then it becomes really, really strong. So make sure you do try to line it up with that if possible, but definitely at least make sure you have a usage of Crusade for phase 3. So if you happen to get Crusade up like 20 seconds before phase 3, just hold on to it. Don't use it right away. Like, make sure you get a use right at the start if possible, or at least once or twice during the phase. Now ads are up again, so go ahead and just kind of cleave them down. Now I'm fixated, so I want to really make sure that I don't get hit by one. It's very important that you don't. You can also use, of course, Fist of Justice, or Hammer of Justice rather, as well as Hand of Hindrance. One's going to stun them and keep them away, and the other is going to go ahead and slow them really, really well. Now in phase 3, typically most guilds will last here. I don't have Crusade up because my Crusade timing is a little funky, thanks to Convergence, but you can either choose to pre-pot on the hero, or generally I like to recommend using pre-pots or second pot with Crusade, because you get both a haste benefit and you get damage, so I think it's a little bit stronger overall. But definitely use Prolonged at this point because there are 3 targets. Make sure you're cleaving the crap out of them because it is all effective damage on Heroic. And just do as much damage as possible. So at this point I do try to turn and hit one of the balls, whichever one we're assigned to. They were a little slow on the call, so I decided to kind of wait a little bit. Wake of Ashes as well as Divine Hammer and Divine Storm. Make sure you're pointing it to hit all 3 bosses as much as you can. And if there happen to be any ads in the way, go ahead and use it on those as well. And remember, Wake does slow, so it is effective on the Parasitic Lashes to keep them away from people. Now, if you need to, if you're called to, you can clear spores with your Divine Shield. So you go ahead and like use your Divine Steed and run over a bunch of them with your bubble active so you don't die from all the stacks. But it can help clear out if you're having space issues with those little green spores. But other than that, it's kind of Cleave City, have a good time cleaving, make sure you keep your Judgment debuff up, of course, and do all that you can to kind of help maintain the ads or control the ads as much as possible as your raid needs. So just more cleave here, blow up the ball that we were assigned to kill, and then the range handle the second ball to make sure they don't overlap and to keep, you know, uptime on the bosses. Again, Wake of Ashes is up, so I want to hit all the bosses. Keeping an eye out for lashes, I noticed they're kind of getting a bit out of control over here, so I kind of aim my Divine Storm to try to hit them. I noticed Call of Night, but unfortunately Control Chaos happens, so I have to run the opposite direction. And then we just finish up the bosses here. Now in Star Augur, I'm going to suggest Divine Hammer for the most part. It just tends to do better on the ads. You could argue for Blade of Wrath if you just want to focus purely single target on the boss in phase 3. Kind of up to you there. Now at the beginning, of course, pre-pot or with war, I really recommend you be very careful about pulling early, because if you pull early, he will hit you at least once, maybe twice, and that can kill you. So just be aware of that and try to be pretty cautious about that. Now, it's pretty much a pure single target fight for the whole thing, so you're just kind of doing what you can, Templar's Verdict all the time, and no ads spawn until phase 3, or I suppose 4, if you want to go by the dungeon journal. Now, you'll be probably split into a group of sorts in phase 1, so make sure you are in that group, so you don't get accidentally frozen by the tank as they run over you with their debuff. Now his hitbox is huge, so take a look at where the tank is and the splash around him, and make sure that you're not getting hit by that. It's very important that you're not taking that extra damage. Again, he has a huge hitbox, so you can be quite far away from him and still hit him. Now if you get the debuff, take it out to the outsides. Alternatively, you can actually just use Bubble. It will explode it immediately and kind of get rid of it, and it doesn't hurt too bad. So go ahead and do that if you want. Of course, it'll only work once. You can use Freedom to move freely, but it will not make the debuff explode like Bubble does. Just something you can do to kind of stay on the boss a bit longer. Now at this point, I had to rebuff, unfortunately, because my buffs came off. I didn't realize the timer was up, but this shouldn't happen, so make sure you do have your buffs refreshed, of course. And at this point, I just Divine Shield to get rid of the debuff and not worry about it too much. And then just keep hitting the boss. So nothing too special here. If you need to go out a lot, you can use Divine Steed or Cavalier with those 2 charges, but I think that Divine Intervention is really useful, especially in the later phases where you might take a bunch of damage. Now again, if you have IC Ejection or someone staying in with it, you could take advantage, or you could just like poke into the tank's splash damage and use Shield of Vengeance to break it if you like. But again, don't get yourself killed doing stuff like that. Now, as far as trinkets go, you want single target trinkets for the most part. It's a very heavy single target fight. Eye of Command, Fault Countermeasure, kind of the usual suspects. And again, Convergence can be good if it gives you a full extra use of Crusade. Then phase 2, if you get the crap, some guilds will do it differently, but in general, we have people like melee just kind of keep it around in melee. Again, he has a huge hitbox, so try to take advantage of that. Try to take it to max melee range, or just put it in decent spots, try not to drop it on people. And remember, you just let it drop, and then you can move a little bit, try to pile it up on other patches of bad. Other than that, you're just doing pure single target here. There's no more splash from the tank, so you don't have to worry about being kind of close to the tanks if you happen to have to, for whatever reason. When Fel Nova comes out, just use your Divine Steed. I would use the Divine Steed a little bit late in the cast, not like right at the end, but maybe halfway through, because that allows you to get out, let it explode, and get back in partway. So as you can see, I'll run away a little, I'll Steed, it bursts, and then I get back in, and I lose maybe 1 global instead of 2 or 3. So timing that correctly can get you a little bit more uptime on the boss. And other than that, you can just keep DPSing him. Now, if you want to, you could stay in. I don't believe Shield of Vengeance will be necessarily enough to keep you alive, but Divine Shield, of course, will if you're willing to give that up, and if it's not on cooldown from phase 1, if you used it to break one of your IC ejections. I'm going to get another Fel ejection here, so I want to make sure I put it in decent spots. I was a little cut off by some of the other people's, so I went ahead and went a little bit toward the tank there. Now, if you do happen to get the debuff, definitely pop Shield of Vengeance if you can. It will break really quickly. So it's one way to pop your shield very easily, but you will take a lot of damage after it as well, so do be careful about that. In this case, I popped Crusade because we said we're going to ignore the ad and just go full on the boss. But in general, you want to save it for when you want to kill the first ad. Whenever you guys Heroism or Bloodlust in phase 3, save it for that. So always have it ready for that no matter what. Now you can, if you want, try to pad a little bit and hit the ads, you can Divine Storm, but Divine Hammer is normally enough, so normally just be Templar's Verdict in, and if you're not going to kill the ad, don't bother cleaving it. It's kind of a waste of DPS. So even though it'll make you look better a little bit on numbers, it is kind of useless DPS, we'll say. But anyway, finish up the boss. Again, you can use Divine Storm if you do need to help kill the ads, the little ones that spawn. But otherwise, just fall on the boss, Templar's Verdict. Unless, again, you want to just pad your numbers and have a little bit of fun doing that. Now, it's a good time, Witness the Void is a good time to break your Shield of Vengeance as it gets higher and higher. So we're talking like 3 stacks maybe, or even 4 if you get that bad. But 2 to 4 is probably a good time to break them, but just use it as you need to survive. Now for Elisande, you're going to want Divine Hammer. There's a lot of cleave going on. You could go Cavalier if you need to move to get stuff, grab those balls, those orbs and stuff, but go ahead and pre-pot at the start and then just Divine Hammer in. I would Shield of Vengeance if you want to get maximum DPS on her, if the tanks don't move her out immediately. Play pop cooldowns here. You could potentially wait till they like all clump up, which is kind of ideal. But once they clump up, just Divine Storm. Remember, as long as there's one ad up and the boss, then you can Divine Storm and it will be quite effective. Now, generally you try not to stand in Spanish Singularity if you can help it. Again, Shield of Vengeance will break pretty easily in there, so you can use that to break if you want, or you can save it to use to walk through an Arcanetic Ring if you can't get to it. Now, if you're confident in where the hole in the ring is, you can kind of chase the boss a little bit here. Here, obviously I messed up a little bit, and I kind of walk through it, but I'm being a little greedy for DPS. Obviously, be safer if you're not certain, so you don't die. It's very important that you don't get yourself killed unnecessarily. Now, make sure you do get your second pink bubble buff if you can, when it does wear off. And take advantage of it, because you do want to have that extra DPS as much as possible. Now, once the ad comes up again, we're going to be Divine Storming. Now, if your guild really has trouble, your raid really has trouble killing the ad, don't be afraid to single target it down instead, but you will do more damage if you can Divine Storm. Now, when the double ring comes out, make sure you are both dodging it and getting into a good place. So as you can see, I see a little opening here. Get back here by the blue bubble. And at this point, I won't chase her too much. I know where the break is. As soon as I see it go through, I will go ahead and waddle at her face. Dodge the rings. Make sure the slow ones that take a while to show up don't get you by accident, as you kind of think, oh, I'm safe, the ring's gone. And then ads come out, make sure you kill them. In this case, I'm just using Divine Storm to kind of cleave it down, even though she's kind of dead. And when you push her into phases, make sure you try to get a sexy pose. It's very important. Divine Hammer will give you like a raised hand sword thing, but if you want to do something else, you probably have to have an ad alive and use like a Judgment or Crusader Strike or something. Now we're back in phase 2 now, so go ahead and if you want to go in, use Shield of Vengeance and then pop your cooldowns if they're up, and just keep going, kind of the repeat of the other phases. Now again, this is where Divine Steed or Cavalier can be really good if there's I can't even say the word, but there's balls. If they're falling and you need to go help grab one of them in range, it's really good to have 2 charges of Divine Steed, because that way you don't miss out on that. But basically you're just cleaving when the ads are up and single targeting when they're down. Now as far as trinkets go, probably just any generally good trinket for single target or cleave is really good, because there's a lot of uptime with ads, but they're not up all the time, so maybe not necessarily things that are like pure AoE but single target losses. And again, convergence can be good if you're getting extra uses out of it, and if you're not, then don't bother with it. Now, don't forget to get your second pink bubble buff every time you do get one. Having a tracker is probably ideal. It's something I don't have yet, but I should do soon. And of course, try not to take too much extra damage. Again, you can pretty much break your Shield of Vengeance whenever you like, whether with rings or puddles if she's next to a puddle. Stuff like that, if you don't want to use it defensively but offensively instead. So double ring, I'll look for the opening, kind of walk through that, and then I'm ready to go for the second round and dodge the stuff. Now you got to be careful in phases 2 and 3, because she doesn't port away when she does those Arcanetic Rings. So it's, you'll be DPSing the boss rather than just sitting there and waiting if you're not chasing her. And so you might get a little careless and you might get yourself into trouble. Now the ad's up, the pink ad's up, so I'm going to go ahead and AoE and kind of cleave down that ad, get this bubble rolling. But the reason I'm staying on the boss is because I have Eye of Command, so I'm kind of being a little bit of a DPS whore there, making sure I keep that crit buff up. Now if you don't have that, or you're not being a little bastard like me, then go ahead and switch to the ads as your main target. That way they'll die faster and you'll get the buff faster. Now, back to phase 3. So it's kind of the same story here. You can Shield of Vengeance in to make sure you don't take too much damage, and then just do as much damage as possible. Now, where you second pot, is kind of up to your guild if you're trying to push phase 1 so that you don't get as many mechanics or as many rings in phase 2 and 3. You can second pot there as soon as it's up or as soon as Crusade is up and ready to go. And if not, just use it on another phase when Crusade is ready to go, or wherever your guild happens to Bloodlust or Heroism. Now in phase 3, you have a little more influence because you can't interrupt the boss, so make sure you are doing that as much as possible. But other than that, it's basically the same story. Kind of walk through some bad stuff here. You can bubble through that if you think you might die, or let it proc with Divine Intervention, or Shield of Vengeance is to reduce the damage you take if you don't use it to start on the boss at the beginning of each phase. Now the ads are coming up, so we'll move the boss eventually over there, and then we'll cleave him down. So using that Divine Storm as much as possible, I grab the pink buff before I go, which is why it's important to kind of keep an eye on it, just to make sure you have full uptime. And then of course, Wake of Ashes, if possible, try to line it up to hit extra ads, but if you can't, it's not the end of the world. That's pretty much how this boss is going to go. Cleave when the ads are up, single target to focus her down when they're not up, and then just dodge mechanics as best as you can, and use your toolkit to survive as well, or to sometimes choose mechanics and allow yourself a little bit more uptime. So here, it's kind of close to the rings, so I want to be careful about that. I see balls out, and try to interrupt every so often. I see a ball, so I was going to go grab it, but somebody did already. And in general, as melee, you won't be getting those balls, kind of up to your raid leader, I suppose. But in general, you'll grab the close balls, and range tend to get the far ones. But in case things happen, of course, you do have the ability to go out there very quickly with your Divine Steed. For Gul'Dan, definitely Divine Hammer. You can argue for Cavalier if you need to go and soak mechanics a lot, like Bonds or get Fire out, stuff like that. But at the start, I do not pop Crusade. I'm saving it for the Watcher or Inquisitor, whatever he's called. But I just open with like the basic Divine Hammer, get 3 Holy Power, and then just Wake of Ashes and such. But as soon as the ads come out, I go on the ads and I just cleave both. So I will Divine Storm hitting both Gul'Dan and this first ad. Now as soon as the Watcher comes out, what I'll do is I'll wait until the Fell Efflux goes out, and then I'll go ahead and pop the extra action button and Crusade, and then just start cleaving really hard, focusing on the Inquisitor or Watcher person. Of course, once the third one comes out, make sure you're cleaving him as well. And when they're done, for me, I have commands that's kind of relevant what I'm hitting, so I try to hit the high health one after the first guy dies here, so that I have maximum uptime on that buff. Use your Shield of Vengeance, break it in the beam if you want to, just don't die doing it because that would be really awkward. And then just lots of cleaving. You can't really hit Gul'Dan, so don't bother, but as soon as the 2 first ads die, make sure you're back to single target. So make sure you're using your Templar's Verdict instead of Divine Storm. And once they die, you get a little rest period, you get to chill out here. And again, trinket-wise, I'm using Convergence, for it gives me a little bit more Crusade uptime, like an extra Crusade or 2. And you can use other stuff if you don't think yours does, or if it's not lining up properly with things like eye spawns or ads and so on. So I not Cavalier, but I Divine Steed back in as soon as he's done. I don't throw Judgment until I see that the debuff is gone from him that protects him from all damage, because it prevents the application of Judgment as well, which is really, really awkward, and you don't want to waste that and have to DPS without it. Now as soon as Hand of Gul'Dan comes out and the ad spawns, you can start Divine Storming. If you don't have Eye of Command, or you're just trying to be helpful and not be a little meter padding bastard like me, then you can switch the ad and do as much damage as you can. But as soon as the eyes spawn, you want to use your extra action button, and actually I do recommend using it a bit earlier on Heroic because it doesn't line up quite right. So I'd say the ad spawns and maybe 5 seconds or 4 seconds before the eye spawn, use it the first time. It will help you get better uptime on the extra action button in the future. But I'm just cleaving away, using my cooldown on cooldown. You can save it for eyes if you need to, but that's kind of up to you. If your group already has like an elemental chamois, for example, or something that really destroys the eyes, then you don't have to worry about it too much and just use your cooldown on cooldown. As long as you're not getting bonds, of course. Now, in this case, I didn't go back to help the empowered bonds because we generally have it under control, so I don't really have to worry about it too much. But if you do, Divine Steed over, you can use Shield of Vengeance to help you survive the hit if you need to. And of course, as a last resort, you do have your bubble. Now, here, I wait for the Fell Liquid Hellfire to happen, and then I pop my extra action button after that. Now, because I didn't use it when I mentioned that you should use it, like a few seconds before the eyes, it's a little bit late, so it'll always be a little bit later as the fight goes on. which is a bit unfortunate, but that's why you try to use it when a little bit earlier the first time around in phase 2. Now, if you happen to get bonded, empowered bonds, you can bubble out of one of them. You still probably want a Hand of Freedom so you walk faster out, but you can just use your Divine Shield and just walk out of it. Just make sure nobody else is in there with you, or they will probably die. Other than that, you can help reduce the damage if you don't have Divine Shield available with Shield of Vengeance. Kind of keep that as a defensive if you need to. And if not, you can probably break it with Liquid Hellfire, things like that, with eyes if you stack on someone, but don't do anything too crazy or wild to try to proc that. Now, as soon as the eyes come out, Divine Storm, lots of AoE, point yourself in the direction that will hit them. They have pretty big hitboxes, but so you don't have to like get on top of them. But Divine Storm should hit most of them, even from the boss, especially if they all went in one direction. Other than that, it's pretty much the same thing over and over in phase 2, so just do what you have to, handle the mechanics, help people out if you need to with bonds. And if you find yourself going back and forth a lot, definitely consider Cavalier so you have more uptime on the boss, even if you have to run away a lot. And then just AoE the eyes when they do come down, and that includes, of course, the Empowered Eye of Gul'Dan. Now, to give the most damage overall, you will be using Divine Storm, but if you need to focus it down because it's dying a little bit too slowly, then make sure you use Templar's Verdict on the eye instead. Make sure you're spread out from the people that get impulsed on, so if you use your extra action button, you don't take fire damage. It's very important that you do that, otherwise it will immediately cancel, which is not useful. Let's add spawns, so go ahead and cleave him down with the boss. Try to Wake of Ashes to hit as many things as possible when you can, but do it, on cooldown when you can. Now, when the boss goes to 30% or 40%, excuse me, and goes into phase 3, then you're going to want to go ahead and kind of prep up, heal yourself. Use your extra action button if you haven't already, if it's ready to be used, because you kind of get a benefit from it anyway. I would wait till the bubble disappears to use it, because it will stay with you until that point. And then just make sure you don't run into fire before it gets used. Now, I went ahead and popped cooldown here. It was probably a mistake because it's pretty low, but I thought that it would be up in a decent time anyway for phase 3. But you can definitely save it if you need to. And I go ahead and use this extra action button as well to kind of maximize uptime of it, as well as lower the cooldown of my Crusade and Wake of Ashes. And we're just kind of hitting him. So now we're in phase 3. And in phase 3, I'm just kind of saying on the boss here, as soon as this debuff goes away and the shield breaks, you can use your extra action button up to that point and put as much damage as you can into him. Now, you can use Divine Steed if you need to push through this, or you can save it till after. Now, make sure you don't stand on the tanks ever, of course, but in this phase, in that wind phase, it can be pretty easy to accidentally walk over them, so just be careful about that. If you get flames, move it out, and then once it starts blowing up, that's kind of where you're going to put it. As you can see, just try to layer it, of course. Shield of Vengeance can help you stay alive during that if you don't have something major, and if you're taking a lot of damage. And then for the eye, generally switch to it, because it's not always going to be next to the boss. And then you can again cleave with Divine Storm for maximum damage, or you can just do Templar's Verdict to make sure it dies even faster. Now, if someone puts fire in melee like that, you do have to run up, but again, remember that it has an enormous hitbox, so you can kind of get out of that. Now, use Soak Souls if you need to. The first ones I happen to know we're pretty good on, because there's not that many, and we have enough ranged. Black Harvest is an AoE, so if you need to, you can Shield of Vengeance. It'll probably blow it up there, and save yourself some damage. And you can also use Bubble if you need to, of course. Now, you get flames. I get flames here, so I run out, and I kind of just poop them out as close as I can, and then go back, and I definitely save a Divine Steed for Storm of the Destroyer, so you can get away, because otherwise you don't really have that many options. Now, that wasn't ideal. I had to run through a couple people with the fire, and I knew that was going to spawn that, but got pretty lucky. Worked out well. You can save your cooldowns. Ask your raid leader how he wants them parsed out, like for the eyes here. And, when they try to line them up with the eye, if you can, really important ones. And then if you get to the last bit, make sure you're soaking souls in the third Storm of the Destroyer, where he follows that with like a Black Harvest. Just kind of do what your raid strategy is, and also keep high uptime on the eyes and boss. So I get flames again. I want to walk out here. It's behind the boss. I don't see too many people anyway, so I'm not too concerned about hitting melee with it. And this Black Harvest, again, you can use a defensive for it if you need to. And again, another possible timing of your cooldowns is to line up with Bloodlust Heroism. Different guilds will do it at different times, so do consider that. Now we get to skip most of this phase because he does kind of just die. He's really close to dying, so we run away here with a Divine Seed and then just finish him up. Normally there are 2 eyes that come in quick succession here, so do be aware of that. Make your way back. Cavalier can help you get back faster, which is another reason that it'd be really good. And that's pretty much it for this fight after the next Black Harvest. And that's pretty much it for Gul'Dan. Hopefully this video helped you pick up some tips and tricks on different bosses that you might have found useful or were curious about. And if you liked the video, feel free to hit with a like. If you want to see when I post new content like this, or just in general, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment section below, or catch me on my stream at twitch.tv and ask me there and hang out and chat if you like. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.